Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So as it is the new year, today is the day that I'm going to talk about my 10 favourite books that I read in 2022. I know some people do these in December, but I read right up until the end of the year, and so I have to wait until I finish everything I'm going to read in 2022 to talk to you about them. As you may know, if you've been around this year, I've had a bit of a weird reading year. The majority of books that I've read this year were just okay. I think that was the most common thing I said in reviews. But I read 104 books, and among those majority just okay books, I have managed to find 10 that I really loved to talk to you about. So that's what we're going to do today. So without further ado, let's get into those books. These are not in any particular order, as I find ranking them fairly difficult. So I'm just going with the order that they popped into my head. And the first one here is The Betrayed by Riene Okake Melvin. This is a proof copy, so I will put the actual cover here so you can see what it would look like. But this is a novel from the Philippines about two sisters, Pilar and Lali, whose father was killed. He was an activist against the Marcos regime, and now the Marcos regime is over. Pilar and Lali, along with Lali's husband Arturo, have gone back. Arturo is the godson of Marcos, and so he gets back involved in politics, and over the course of this book he is campaigning to be in power under the new system. But there have been 6 attempted coups over the course of the past year, and so we'll see through his eyes how the system is not that different, and the people who are in power under the Marcos regime, aside from Marcos, are still the ones holding the reins. Lali is pregnant and exploring that side of her life, her body, and she also sees ghosts, including the ghost of her father. And Pilar is discovering her own obsessive love for her sister's husband. So this is a book with not a huge amount of plot. There is not that much that happens, but we travel with Arturo and with Lali as they go around the country. Lali trying to uncover why these ghosts are haunting her, and Arturo trying to gain power, as I said. It is a book about the past and the way the past haunts you. It is a book about the change in regime and the ways that things are not changing, the powers that people have. It is a book about class and a book about bodies and our own relationships with ourselves. It is really a deeply layered book, and there is so much going on, even though there is not much going on in terms of plot. It is also a book where the setting is really part of this. You can really feel Manila, this big bustling city, on the edge of political chaos, as well as the other islands that they travel to in the Philippines, the more rural areas, the places where the ghosts feel closer to the surface and where superstition is part of everyday life. It is a very heavy, sticky novel where the heat and humidity of a Manila wet season feels very much present in the prose, and it has that tinge of magical realism where people accept the magic and the portents and the ghosts. A Strange Moment with a Giant Fish, for example. It's such a really wonderfully atmospheric novel, as I said. I think that's what I loved the most about it. Another book I loved that I've talked about a lot this year was Keeping the House by Ticci Chin. This is set in North London, and it is about a woman and her daughter. Those are the main characters, over the time periods of the 90s and the 2000s. The woman's partner has just gone to prison, and he has challenged her to bring the heroine that he has in Turkey back over to London. This is a Turkish and Turkish Cypriot community in North London that we are set in, and it is about her and her daughter, as I said, over the course of 2 decades as things unfold, of organised crime and of youth and coming of age in North London in a working class community that is very tightly knit. Again, this is one with not a huge amount of plot, and one where it is actually quite hard to keep the plot straight in your head because we jump from different perspectives and different time periods back and forth without a huge amount of signposting. But I think that confusion really adds something to the book. We really see various different relationships. The ideas of gender and of class are very clear throughout the book, and it is also very, very darkly comic. It is one that I could really see as a TV series because it has this kind of dark, very London humour. I'm sure there is a lot of Turkish culture specific humour and things as well, but it's one of those books where the specificity really lends itself to being enjoyed more widely, I think, because although you might not understand the direct references, the relationships are so well built up that they feel very realistic. It does have a lot of violence, domestic violence and sexual violence in particular, but what I really loved was the place, the setting, the community. It all felt so very real, very London, and as a Londoner myself, I really enjoyed that. It is set between small council houses where parties are taking place, and the parks in between those, as well as in corner shops and in back rooms. And it is a really well built up slice of life, and it has really incredibly beautiful writing, really interestingly done, with bits of translation squeezed between the lines and people talking in this kind of with a lot of like Turkish slipped in between the words in a way that feels really authentic, and I really enjoyed it. My first 5-star read of this year was Honorifics by Cynthia Miller, which is a collection of poetry, and I'm really glad I enjoyed it because I've been trying to read more poetry. I used to read a lot of poetry, but I've kind of fallen out of the habit, and a lot of the popular poetry I don't really enjoy, but this one I really did. I always find it hard to describe poetry and what is going on in poetry, but this one is very much an exploration of family, identity and language, particularly Mandarin Chinese from Cynthia Miller's Malaysian Chinese family. It's Mandarin, but also Hokkien is important to it, and there are places where that is shown throughout with the written language of Mandarin Chinese, but also with sort of direct translations littered throughout as well, in a way that feels very poetic and beautiful. It's also got a lot of like science and very physical descriptions, which I think I really love. There was a poem about a jellyfish, and I really enjoyed that one. It has, the descriptions were stunning, and the imagery used I thought was really wonderful. Yeah, it also talks about stars, and I feel like there was quite a science bent to it, but I thought done in a really lovely way. And it explores the multifaceted identities which a person contains, as well as ideas of migration and realities of that, and the prejudice of people against those who have migrated. I don't know if I'm giving this the best description. As I said, I struggle with describing poetry, but it was really beautiful, and it's the only poetry on my top 10 list. I also read The Discomfort of Evening by Marieke Lucas Reineveld, and I really loved this book, although it is a very difficult one, and one I know that would not be everyone's favourite, but for me it was one of the most powerful reads that I've read this year. Sorry about that, I had to move because the sun was directly behind my head, so I don't think you could see me at all, so I've come over here, but I was talking about The Discomfort of Evening and how much I love that book. So it is about a young girl who is grieving. Her whole family is grieving because she lost her brother in a ice skating accident, and it is a Dutch book set over a cold winter in a small religious community in the Netherlands, which is very closed and insular, and around which there is a lot of shame. So it is a book about where, again, not much happens. She just moves through her life dealing with her grief, and her family are dealing with their grief in ways that are very not healthy, and there are strained relationships between them, and also a lot of violence. A very strange, disconnected book where our character feels almost like she's inside a bubble and she is disconnected from the world around her, and so things keep happening to her, which she doesn't seem to be necessarily like consciously part of. She's there, but she's not actively awake through them, and it is a really interesting like psychological study where that none of the things that happened felt particularly voyeuristic to me. They felt like they came from this place of grief and of darkness and of this small insular community where these things are accepted, and it is there trying to like grapple with that, with their place in this society. Our main character blames herself for the death of her brother and the way that she acts out after that. It's written in this kind of disconnected, very cold way, but I felt like it really that's what made it feel not voyeuristic and feel more true and honest. That really shocked me and made me feel things like very physically. I had a really physical reaction to this book, and that's one of the reasons that I think it stuck with me so much. I've read a lot this year that is trying to do something similar, that is trying to be dark and shocking and like of the body, very visceral, and a lot of them haven't worked for me because they've felt performative and they felt very constructed, and I think the thing that I really liked about this book was that it didn't do that. It felt much more true than a lot of the other books with similar ideas. But another one that I read that is actually on a similar vein and really enjoyed was The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima. This is a modern classic from Japan, published in the 60s. Published in 1965, and this was translated by John Nathan. And this is about a young boy who is, his father has died and his mother is has met a sailor and is embarking on a relationship with this sailor. And our protagonist, this young boy, is got involved with this group of boys who feel disillusioned with the world. They feel disconnected with the world, and they feel like everything is lies and falsehood, and they are the only people who can really understand what is going on in the world. It is a coming of age story, but one where that becoming aware of the world and becoming aware of one's own body and the darkness to which that can go is very much a part of it. Our main character and his friends idealise the sailor when they first meet him. Our main character wishes to be a sailor, but as they get to know him, as he tries to interact with them, they slowly become disillusioned, and their disillusionment leads to this dark, violent place. Again, Similarly to The Discomfort of Evening, if you don't like animal torture, I wouldn't read either of them. In the context of this book, it really made a lot of sense, that the way that it happened and the disconnect our character feels with it, I think. Again, it had that kind of dreamlike quality, this discomfort with this sort of liminal space between childhood and adulthood. I feel like this book had the history of Japan in the 1950s sort of hanging over it. There was a lot of like references to military and martial things, the way the boys interact with one another, and kind of disused, abandoned military places around as well. And I think that the war and the history of Japan during the war, and of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the darkness and the places to which people can go, was hanging over this in a sort of unsaid way, that I think worked very well. It wasn't very on the nose, it was just sort of there in the background, allowing you to notice the way that this past had still had an impact, and masculinity and everything. There was a big part of this book that was about masculinity and boyhood to manhood, that I thought was really interestingly done. The only non-fiction on my list is On Gallows Down by Nicola Chester, and this is a memoir, and I am surprised that a memoir has made it onto this list, because I've read several that I really didn't like, but I really enjoyed this one. It covers all of her life from her childhood up until the time she's writing, about her relationship and her interaction with activism as it relates to the natural world. So she begins with her childhood growing up near Greenham Common and the Greenham Common camp that was protesting against the placement of nuclear warheads there, and then her in her early 20s becoming involved with a campaign to stop a M3 bypass going around her town. And it's very much set in place. It feels like it's of the place, and the nature writing part of it is really beautiful and wonderfully evoked, but I like the way that she connects that to both history and politics. As part of the M3 bypass, we see her relationship, her interactions with the police, and her living in a tree for a time period, their knowledge of this as a futile but feel like necessary work. Her relationship with space and her feeling connected to this land in particular in a way that felt different to a lot of, like it didn't feel particularly nationalist or patriotic in a kind of traditional sense. In particular, she talks about the enclosures of common land, and I like the way she related it to that. And also, Gallows Down is at the top of a hill, so she lived on either side of the hill at different points in her life. There is a gibbet up there, and she tells the story of the two people who were the only people ever to be hanged on this gibbet, and uses that as a way that the history sort of hangs over this place. She also works in one of the big houses, one of the places where this land was enclosed. She tries to encourage a more relationship with the natural world from this estate that is better ecologically, and she sees the way that she is like manipulated and tricked, and again links that back through history. That is very personal, very vulnerable, and very emotional, and I really loved her writing style. I thought it was a combination of kind of a journalistic and a more poetic style that I thought worked really well together. It never felt particularly jarring. The construction of it was really well done, and that's what I'm kind of looking for in a memoir. I feel a lot of the time the construction falls down, but in this one it worked particularly well. I also loved The Vegetarian by Han Kang, and I know a lot of people have loved this one. It's a very popular book, but I think it definitely deserves it. This is a piece that has been translated from the Korean by Deborah White, and is about a woman who decides to stop eating meat after she has a horrible dream. But that kind of is quite simplistic of what it is actually about. It is about control and the ways that the different people try to subtly or not so subtly control this woman in her life. And it's told from three perspectives: that of her husband, her brother-in-law, and her sister. In the beginning, I found it a very grating, difficult book to read, but it is because the perspective of her husband is done so well. And we see her descent into a different kind of being, her kind of transformation, or her desire for transformation, and the ways that this affects the people around her, her stepping outside of what is allowed, what are the boundaries that people will accept from her, and the ways that people try to persuade her into those boundaries, or how they accept her transformation in a way that will benefit them. There is a lot about objectification and the use of women in the very patriarchal culture, and I thought it was just so wonderfully done. I found it really creepy and dark, particularly for the second section, which involves her brother-in-law's obsession with her birthmark, and he's an artist, and with painting and sex, and it's very, again, of the body in a way that I really enjoyed. Metamorphoses between people and plants there is a big part of this book as well. I've heard that it is based on a Greek myth, and I couldn't see that anywhere, but I believe it's probably Daphne. It gets darker and darker and more dreamlike almost as you go through the book, through the different perspectives, and I thought it was just incredibly powerful read, and one that the feeling that I've had with it has stuck with me. A book that was wonderfully written, but also very compelling and page-turning, which I find they don't often go hand in hand, but they definitely do in the case of The Vegetarian, and I really enjoyed it. I like that sitting with the body. I think, as you can probably tell from a lot of the books on this list, that is something that really interests me, and I really enjoyed it, particularly in The Vegetarian. Another piece of translated fiction that I read back at the beginning of the year was A General Theory of Oblivion by Jose Eduardo Aguilusa, who is an Angolan writer. And this is about a woman who moves to Angola from Portugal because she has experienced a really violent gang rape, and she moves to Angola to live with her sister and her husband, but they have been involved in diamond. Is the fight for independence rises up in Angola. They flee back to Portugal, and there are diamonds that they are trying to take with them, but our main character knows nothing of this, and when that violence breaks out, she bricks herself into her apartment and stays there for decades, I think. And it is based on a true story, where she grows things on her garden, she catches water from the rain, and she just lives by herself until one day a boy climbs onto her balcony and she is exposed again to the outside world. And so this book is a very strange combination of like a crime novel involved in these diamonds and where have the diamonds gone, who's got the diamond. Also a very still, slow moving book about a woman who's bricked herself into a apartment. We see the outside world in ways that it relates to her. We see this organised crime, and we see the uprising and the fight for independence and what happened afterwards in Angola, the rise of different political factions, but we also see things from her stillness and her very small part of the world where she knows nothing. And it's really interestingly told from the peripheries, not from the people directly involved. So we hear things rather than see them play out on the page, but in a way that I really enjoyed. We are kind of almost overhearing the story of what is going on, overhearing it from the balcony as it floats in to the apartment. Again, another sort of magical realist, fabulous touch to it. There is a singing pygmy hippopotamus at one point, which image really stuck out to me. So it has a sense of the fantastical and the absurd linked to this kind of idea of political violence and the absurdity that one accepts. Again, darkly funny and strange book, one that is not quite what I was expecting when I went into it, but I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was wonderfully written and wonderfully interesting, and I definitely want to read more of Aguilusa's work. I think there's definitely a theme across these books, and another one that was kind of an interesting relationship, very insular between women, is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. This is about a woman who has had a difficult relationship with her mother throughout her life. They lived in an ashram for part of it, and her mother was a relationship with the head of the ashram, and kind of ignored her own daughter, but now in the present day her mother has Alzheimer's and is losing her memory, and this daughter is having to look after her through her illness despite the difficulty of their relationship beforehand and the ongoing difficulty of their relationship. And we are very much in her mind. We see her mistrust of her mother, her uncertainty about what is going on, and the people around her as they question her, placate her, make her not quite believe herself, being unsure of what is going on for herself, as well as her mother's illness affects her relationship with her husband, and we also flash back to her childhood and see the ways that she grew up, the ways that her mother was this manipulative character, and the way that their relationship played out, the reason that you can see for her suspicion and her uncertainty, and she becomes an unreliable, very unlikable narrator. There is not a lot of kindness in her, particularly in her relationship with her mother, but even with her husband there's a disconnect again from the rest of her life. And I didn't know, going into this one, I thought I wouldn't like it, the way that people had talked about that disconnect, talked about this relationship. I thought it wouldn't be for me. I thought that I would need some warmth to the book, but I really, really enjoyed it. I really loved the way that relationship played out. I really enjoyed the paranoia and the darkness. It's another book where art is represented, and as our main character is an artist, she's drawing the face of this man over and over again, and we kind of see this spiraling, this obsession is part of it, this repetition, and the ways that things play out over and over again is very central to the book, and I thought done just so wonderfully, and I really, really loved this book. It surprised me, but I really did. And then finally, the most recent book that I read this year that I really loved is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfeld. I thought this was a brilliant book and exactly what I wanted from it. It was very hyped. Everyone that I know who has read it and talked about it has really loved it, but I think that it lives up to that hype. It is a story of a relationship between two women, one of whom went down in a submarine, and her mission was delayed, and she came back changed, and her wife, who stayed at home, is now dealing with this woman, with the change in their relationship and with having to care for her, because she is staying in the bath all day and drinking salt water, and she is not who she was before. The connection that they had between them, that we can see through flashbacks, has disappeared as her wife is no longer interested in what she used to be and is no longer connecting with her wife as she once did. And we see things from both their perspectives, but not through the same time period. So when the wife has returned from the sea, we see from the wife who was left behind, but we also see what happened in the submarine. It is two different stories of very still, very closed places with a very limited sense of characters. So it's a very claustrophobic book. There is a lot of tension, and there is not a huge climax or a huge release from that tension throughout the course of the book. It is a melancholy book, a book about loss and sadness and grief, depression and ill health, and the body. Again, there are some really grim, gross descriptions of bodily things that happen in here that I loved, because they were done with such like beautiful language that I thought it was really wonderful. And there is this feeling of homegoing and of change and of catabasis, of going down into the underworld, that is part of the submarine journey, of her going down to the depths of the ocean. It felt like there was a touch of something else, but it was never quite, it's never explored or never explained. It's not like a big sci-fi kind of feeling. That mystery hangs over the book, but it is not one with a satisfactory answer. You just sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And it made me cry. The ending of this book really moved me. That sense of loss and missing, this feeling that something is missing, pervades throughout the book, and I thought it was just really evocative of that emotion. So those are the 10 books that I read in 2022 that I really loved, and I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please do let me know in the comments down below what your favourite books were that you read in 2022, and if you did like this video, do remember to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.